Hey there, folks. So, the last couple episodes we were going through and we were fixing up our to do list. And from that, we're just clearing off some of the many sort of like comments I'd added in to fix this, adjust that, things like that. We didn't completely finish that list, obviously, as you can see. Some of those were things like we're waiting on other components to be finished. Other ones are things I'm still trying to decide how I want to do, such as the side effects for complex needs. We've got things like alternate to having a tick on the inventory component. And then a few other things like with the AI, when its flee action is called, finding that point that it can flee to, making sure it gets a valid one. So I also said I wasn't sure what the next episode was going to be. For anyone who's observant enough, obviously you're going to be able to tell I'm looking at doing the equipment system. So that is where we are going to get started today. Now, before we start diving into the code, one thing I wanted to go over, and I understand it's not code work, but it's part of the game design stuff that I'm working on, so it's going to get documented. Right here we have what was the... So I was cleaning this up so I can work on it. The equipable class breakdown that I had done a couple episodes back here. And I've been... This is where I was struggling on how I wanted to do this. And for that, let me explain. My plan is here. I'll put a new empty layer over this. This is what we're looking at here. Primarily because ammo, it's literally just a data class. Actually, I might even just do this. But anyway, so we're looking at the weapon and its sub-child items. And with that, actually, I'm going to get rid of one of these arrows because I don't need this in here. I was trying to think, how am I going to handle things like, for anyone familiar with 7 Days to Die, and I believe it was Alpha 20 and before, things like glass jars that you can use to scoop up water and things like that, or buckets. And again, that was something that was in 7 Days to Die. Both of those were there and they've got removed. Or for anyone who's familiar with Project Zomboid, you have a huge number of containers, but in there you have the isometric view with a right-click context menu, which is not something I'm intending because this is a first-person, third-person, so the cursor's not always on display and things like that. So I was trying to think, how do I go about having a container for liquid? And I was sitting here and I was thinking, okay, well, let's drop this back down to 2 pixels for a second. I was thinking, okay, well, we've got our container here, which is a child of the clothing, but that's for things like backpacks or webbing, if you've got military, and if you have an idea, that's the pouches and stuff that you can wear over your bulletproof vest, things like that. But either way, instead of getting sidetracked, you have this here, but that's an inventory container. That's not something that has a liquid capacity. And that's predominantly what I've been trying and fighting with for the last little while is how would I do a glass jar that has the ability to hold a set amount of liquid and determine what liquid's in there, because you could have a glass jar that's full of water, full of gasoline, full of bleach, full of paint, like all these different things that you could put in there. And that's ultimately what I was struggling with. And actually it was the first attempt at recording this episode in the initial talking part where it clicked in my head on how to do that. And my plan here is, let's go to a slightly different blue and make it a little lighter, is I want to extend that to include a child of the ranged item that is going to be Let me just get this put in here. Sorry, I'm just typing this out quickly, and the way my brain works, I don't want to type and talk because I will type what I'm saying. So what I want to do here is I want to, and it may not make any sense, so I'll explain that, but I want to extend a child class of a ranged item that is going to be the liquid containers. Now, let me explain why I've decided to go this way. So weapons, as we've got here, and I don't have all my notes in because typing in Krita sucks. Need a better way for that. But anyway, so we're going to have our weapon class, which is extended as a child of our equipable. And that's going to include things like a handiness and a base damage. And that's going to be something that's applied to melee and ranged. It's not documented in here, but I'm also going to have a primary action and a secondary action for a weapon class. And what that is going to be is that's going to be like the with a rifle, for example, or a ranged weapon. You've got your secondary action, which would be look down the sights, and your primary action, which would be pull the trigger. Or for a melee weapon, you'll have your primary action is swing, your secondary action is block. Or, again, taking 7 Days to Die as an example, it's a power attack. I'm not going that route, I'm just using that as an explanation. So melee weapons are going to have a primary and a secondary. Ranged weapons are going to have a primary and secondary. The one thing that ranged weapons have that melee don't is they're going to have a ammunition capacity. And I was thinking, well, we could just leverage that ammunition capacity for reference to how much is stored within the container, the liquid container. Primary and secondary action obviously can be pour out or drink or fill, all depending on what's going on. So ultimately, and I understand I've taken like 8 minutes now to get to this point, but ultimately this is what I was struggling with and what was holding up getting this episode moving forward. And I wanted to cover and go through this and sort of explain some of this information before we sort of started diving in to code work and things like that, because this was the holdup, is how do I want to do liquid containers? And from there, how do we implement that at a code level? And that was the big one that was holding me up is, okay, I want to have a liquid container. Where in this structure do I want to have it extend off? Because like you could have it extend, like one of my original thoughts is between equipable and weapon, throw in another class which was handheld. So you could say, okay, you have handheld, which are weapons or non-weapons. And then you could have the non-weapon section have all of this stuff. And then I was thinking, well, no, I don't need to do that. And that's actually what clicked in the first attempt at recording this, was, well, all of the logic we need for a liquid container exists within like these, I'm going to vector layer, that's why, these two classes right here. So I don't need to reinvent the wheel, create a new class. I can use this pre-existing logic that's going to be on these two classes and just have a subclass of range. So with that, I'm going to move this out of the way and we're going to start looking at some things here and how we want to go about that. So first and foremost, we have our equipable item base. And this is what we just had in that screenshot. This is where we have our skeletal mesh. We have our is equipped flag, and we have our slot type, and we have some basic code for that. I made this all a header only class, didn't I? Nope. So I'm going to quickly clean that up. So now this is something that for people who aren't 100% up to speed with C++, that you can do what's called a header only class. And instead of having this information here in a source file, everything's in the header. And what that would mean is any other class that includes this header reference, like include items, equipable item base.h, it's going to know about all of it, and it's going to have this code. So it's sort of, well, that's the same as that define the force inline. Basically, it's saying copy this code into your own code so that it's all in one place. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. So what I've done here, though, is I've got a class that's sort of half header, half source file, because get slot, get character mesh, they're in the source. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just move these both into the header. So get that done quick, and it's going to be return slot type. So we can get rid of this one. Because we don't even need that. And then let's return character mesh on get equipable mesh. Because again, we don't need character mesh. If I could spell. We're not doing any data processing or anything like that. This class is purely for data access, nothing else. Well, not even data access. It's for storing that information. We're not doing any logic processing on that, with the exception of this one function that I'm looking at right here, which is setting it up for if it's equipped. And ultimately, like, none of this is equipped. Return is equipable. Sorry. This is not an issue. So we can go through and get rid of this as well. And this just helps clean things up so that the source file is really not needed. Now, in here, there's a couple of things. Well, actually, in here, there's actually nothing else we want to do. But we need to look at some of this in our weapon item base. First things first is going to be this slot type. I don't want this to be set as a, I don't want to say null value, but it's not initialized. And if we go, this is going to leave a default option there, and I don't want that on a equipment item base because it's not intended as a actually right here this needs to change blueprintable blueprint type, but it's not intended for this. This is just a data class. It's not intended to be used. This is where it should be an abstract class. My brain doesn't want to work. I'm pretty sure that's the one. It cannot be used directly. It's like, this is purely to be parented. But one of the things we can do with that is over in our weapon item base, we can give itself give it a constructor. Now let me just throw these in here because we're now writing some code. Protected and public. Now you can do private, protected, public. If you want. This is for anyone who hasn't been following along in series. I do this for my own personal organization, and then I know which sections are which. But as for the constructor, I'm actually going to throw it down as a public constructor. Do I want public? No, I'm going to make it a protected, because then we can call it from any child class, but we don't have the ability to modify it. Can't call it from any other classes. So I may change that and may become public. I'm not sure, but we're going to create the definition for that. And the main reason for that is I want to do this. What this is doing here is it's any class class that's derived from the U weapon item base by default is getting its slot type set to a weapon, because in that way we don't have to worry about accidentally missing it. And at the same time, we're going to want to do that with our clothing item base. So, no, I don't know, actually, clothing item base, default. Actually, I will do that there as well. So I was just trying to think, because we have multiple different clothing items, but we'll do that here as well. And this is just to give it a default value if it is derived for the blueprint that is derived from this particular class. So we're going to throw that on here, and slot type equals equipment slot legs by default. All right, we can get rid of clothing item base here though. Now back to our weapon stuff. We're gonna bring back my little critter diagram here, so you can in here you can see we have handiness, damage, and then we have some additional information down here. Handiness and damage are two fairly simple ones we can add in right here. So in our private section, no, we want this to be protected, because again, we're going to be deriving from this. So it's going to be U property, edit defaults only, blueprint read only, meta equals allow private access equals true, and tooltip equals this. I'm going to leave that blank because I'm going to copy this here. And we want to go float base damage. And the reason being for this is there's going to be damage modifiers. So you could think of, with a melee weapon, you're going to have strength modifier. Your as a character, a stronger character is going to be able to swing a baseball bat and cause more damage than a weaker character. Or you're going to have, say, take a rifle. It's got multiple different types of, I'm just going to pick an arbitrary 5.56 round. There's multiple different types of 5.56 you can use, and they're going to have different damage modifiers. So some, let's say, subsonic rounds, they're not going to have as much damage, but they're going to make less noise. There's a bunch of other factors to account for in there. So that is a pretty basic one there. Now for handiness, we're actually going to want to set that up as an enum. So what we're going to need to do here, we're going to do a quick build. I did a build just before we started this episode just to make sure, double check everything I did in the last couple episodes still worked. Had no issues with it. So we're going to do a build here. Yeah, expecting that one. All right, we're going to hop into the editor. And with that, we are going to just go through and create a basic enum. Now, I've covered that in pretty much every episode. So what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, because we're already at 20 minutes and I want to sort of try and make some progress with this episode, I'm going to pause the video here and I'm going to come back once we've made that specific data type for the handiness enum. Alright, so I went through and I created the basic enum, and I just went through and did the normal setup. I cleared out the source file so there's nothing in there, and set up the header with the basic information that we're going to start with. And that's just the initial declaration, the brain's not wanting to work, the decorator for the UEnum with the blueprint type attribute, and then setting up the enum class handiness based off of uint 8. Now, we would want to go through and we're going to set up our handiness there. So it's going to be H for handiness underscore left, H underscore right, and H underscore both. But anyway, so we've just gone through and we set up some basics here. Right now there's a complaint of doesn't have a 0 entry, so we're going to do that. I'm going to go 0 equals 1 and equals 2. That'll get rid of this once IntelliSense catches up. And the other thing we're going to want to do is add that UMeta display that we have on our other ones. So we're going to copy that from our core stat in this case. And we're just going to tuck that in neatly here on all of these. Put a space in there. And then we're going to go... Actually, and there's a fourth one we need. Left. Right. Both. Or H underscore either. And it's going to be our third entry. And our UMeta for that is going to be either. And just to run through what these are for, this is obviously it only goes in your left hand, only goes in your right hand, requires both hands to use. So that's a two-handed weapon. So think a rifle or, well, you could use a pool cue as an example. You'd want to use two hands for that. Then you have either, which is going to be an extra. I just thought there's a fifth one we want to add in here. Either means it can go in your left hand or your right hand. And then I'm not sure how to name this one, but we'll go back to, say, a baseball bat, for example. By default, you're going to be able to use left hand, right hand, both hands for that. So it's going to be left, right, both. Well, so in that case, it would be both or either. And I don't know if I want to call that multi or universal. I think I'm going to go for multi. And this is going to be our fifth option in there. We're going to throw our UMeta in and I'm going to call that combination. And I can't spell multi right? I put mullet. So we have our handiness in there. So that gives us that. And that's our basic setup here. And from there, we can get rid of our source and our header file. We don't need to worry about those again. So we need to obviously add that in here. And I've found from past experience, we can't just declare it as an enum. We actually need to add that include here. So we're going to go include data type handiness. So with that, we're going to copy over our U property from our base damage, and then it's going to go E handiness, weapon handiness, and we're going to say that is going to be E handiness. I'm going to default everything to just the right hand. So now there is a couple other things we're going to want to do in here. We need to add in what, as I mentioned, our primary action and our secondary action. But because we want to expose this to blueprints, because this is going to be a blueprint stuff that deals with that, we're going to need to make sure they are blueprint accessible to override. So what we need to do here is U function blueprint native event, and then these are going to be virtual void primary action, and then we need to obviously expand that to be implementation. Is that the right one? Let me look at a player character here. For anyone wondering, I suck when it comes to spelling. I do have a mild form of dyslexia, so You may have picked that up based on how horrible my spelling is with a lot of things. Yep, that was right. Must be non-virtual. Okay, so get rid of that. And then we're going to want a secondary one, which is going to be void secondary action. And we're going to repeat what we had there, virtual void second, is that? Oh, that's just because we don't have them declared. Secondary action. Copy that over. So, what are you complaining? Yeah, it's non-virtual. Or are you complaining about that one? Let's get rid of that and see if that fixes that error. Now what we're going to want to do here though is include logger.h, and the reason being for this is these base implementations, yeah, it just hasn't updated, so I'm going to put that back to virtual. So these base implementations, oh wow, I cannot spell, are going to be, well, really, all we're going to do here is we're just going to add a log error message. So logger get instance add message error level or error level critical, because we're calling a function that doesn't exist. Primary we'll set that up with primary action not defined, and we're going to do the same thing for secondary action not defined. Now what we could do is, and this is something I'm going to deal with offline because I'm not 100% sure on how to do it and it could take me quite some time to figure out, is I actually want to go through and add in the class name. So we could be like BP underscore shotgun 01. So we could actually add that in there. So it's easier when you're looking at your logs to identify where the problem is. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time off camera figuring that out, and we'll cover that in the next episode. But in here, this gives us our basic setup, and I'm just going to ignore that. So I'm going to run a build while I keep talking, just to see if we can get that error to go away. So what we've done here is we've set up the very basics for our weapon class, which is something that would be held in the hands of the character. Now, obviously, we need to... Excuse me. Sorry, I just had a cough there. We can see, sorry, just quickly to sidetrack, we can see build succeeded, so this is no longer an issue. This is perfectly fine the way we have these set up. So with that though, I was going to say we have our primary action, our secondary action, and then we have the functionality, well not functionality, we have our handiness and our base damage. And this is, if I pull up Crita again here, just draw that over, the basics of what we had in here. And that gives us this class here. And next episode, because we are hitting that 30-minute mark, I'm going to start work on the melee class, and that'll include getting things set up so we can actually start attaching things to the character and potentially playing animations and things like that. So with that though, folks, as I said, we're coming up on that 30-minute mark, so I'm going to end things off here. I do understand, again, we're not making much visible progress, but this portion of the equipment is a lot of just raw code and data before we can start getting back into the editor and start doing more visually accomplishing things. And that's things like setting up so that the baseball bat attaches to the player's hand so that they can swing and things like that. So, hey there, folks. So last episode we had started working on the handheld items, whatever you want to call it. For the sake of my project, I'm actually calling them a weapon item base. We got some of the basic stuff done in here, but there is a couple of additional things I want to include. Before I go into that, though, just to bring back our little, I don't want to call it a class diagram, it's sort of a class tree, and even that's a little questionable. So in here, you can see we've been working on the weapon item. I had mentioned we're going to work on the melee item this episode, which is what we're going to do, but there's a couple of things I need to address before that. So, for that, one of the things that I want to address is in here, if we go back to our equipable item base, you can see we have a skeletal mesh actor, or skeletal mesh reference in this case, for the item that is to be displayed on the character. Now, the problem there is not all weapons are going to be a skeletal mesh. Apparently I left my phone on again. Not all weapons or handheld items are going to be a skeletal mesh. Think a glass jar or a baseball bat. They don't need to be a skinned skeletal mesh. They have no independent animations. You don't have like a bolt on a rifle that you need to move or anything like that. So resource wise and just asset wise, it makes sense for those to be a static mesh. So we're going to need a way to address that. So in our weapon item base, we're going to add a couple other things in here. So I'm going to grab this U property we've got here. Why is that one so different? Edit defaults only, blueprint read. Oh, copy paste added spaces in. So I was trying to figure out why these two were on like entirely different line lengths. So let's fix that out so they're universal. Anyways, so what I want to do here, we're going to add in another property that is, again, edit defaults only. And this is just for those who can't remember or haven't really been following along yet. That an edit defaults only allows you to just modify it within the blueprint actor you create. You cannot edit it in the scene. You cannot edit it through blueprint code because we have the blueprint read only. So this is going to be a Boolean value, and it is going to be use static mesh. We're going to say false for this, so false. And then we're also going to add a static mesh pointer, static mesh. No, I don't want to call it static mesh. Weapon mesh. So the whole purpose for this is for adding the mesh to the character. We're going to need to either add it as a static mesh or a skeletal mesh. So, but on top of that, we're not actually going to be adding I'm trying to think of the word I want to hear. A direct static mesh or a direct skeletal mesh to our character. We're actually going to be attaching a child blueprint. So now this is also going to depend, well, this next one I should say is also going to depend on how the assets in your project are created, acquired, and designed. So now let me open up Blender here. Give me 1 second. Okay, I can't open Blender. It seems I have an update pending. So with that though, so to save trying to expand on that and not continue where I'm going, well actually no, to expand on that, not just sort of wait. Every actor skeletal mesh or static mesh has what is called its point of origin or its pivot point, or there's a lot of different terms for it, but that is where on the mesh itself the 0, 0, 0 point is. And that's a relative to the mesh, not to the world or anything like that. So, excuse me. What you need to account for there is that. So we also need to add in a... well, actually, before I go into that, so you're going to want to provide a way to, and again, this is based on how your assets are defined, to adjust the relative offset of said asset based on where its origin point is. So you will have, if you're somebody like myself, I'm not a masterful 3D artist. I'm a programmer. My assets I acquire from the asset store, from Humble, from third-party creators. I'll just throw everyone into that because that's the best way to describe it. And not every single person uses the same, I don't want to say rules, but the same methodology for creating assets, and the point of origin isn't always going to be, say, if being held, the point of origin would be the middle of a palm. Things like that. So you're going to need a way to adjust for that. Also, different content creators will use the x-axis forwards, or the y-axis forwards, or the z-axis forward. So you're going to want to account for that as well. Now, you have two ways of going about this. You could go F vector mesh offset and F rotator mesh offset rotation, which is perfectly fine if you want to do that because you want to have just those two. The other option, and it's actually the method I'm going to be going for, and that's just because, again, some scales are also slightly different. Like, I may get a baseball bat from one asset creator that is scaled to a 7-head tall human because it's the heroic, or is that 7 or is that 9? I can't remember, but we'll say it's scaled to 7-head humans, and then I get a baseball bat with nails through it that's from a different creator that uses, say, an 8-head scale for a human. So the bats are scaled differently, and then ultimately the character mesh I'm using are scaled to 9 heads. Again, I'm just picking arbitrary numbers. I'm not saying that's the way they are. It's just for this purpose of the example. So with that, I may also need to adjust the scale of the asset. So instead of using an F vector and an F rotator, pretty obvious F transform. And this is just going to be called mesh offsets. Offsets with an S. And the whole purpose for that is, again, purely so we can adjust based on the center of origin, adjust based on the rotation, and adjust based on the scale. It's all stored within one item, like one data value. So, with that, we've got almost everything we need done here to move on to our melee weapon. The only other thing, and this is going to be, again, depending on how you want to set things up, what I want to do for the purpose of animations is I don't want to have... I'm trying to think how to describe this. A huge list of, or a very expansive anim blueprint that's got all these different anim states and things like that. What I want is each weapon to have a animation set that, when used, the event within the character, so when primary action is called, it will modify back to the owner, things like that. What will happen is the animation will be pulled from this data asset, and the character will be told to play this asset, this animation asset. So there is a little bit more to that, though. And bear with me 1 second here. Sorry, I just had to find my notes. Again, this is going to be down to how you're setting up the structure of your game, the characters in your games, things like that. You can have assets based on, like animation assets, I should say, excuse me, that are particular to a skeleton. I'm just trying to think of the right terms to use here, because certain skeletons only have certain assets, that, like animation assets, that they can play. So if you've ever messed around with that, if you have an animation asset that's not correctly targeted for the mesh you're using, things get really weird. I'll just say that. So that is something else to keep in mind when you're working on this, is you need to make sure that the animations you're using are the correct for the skeleton, so on and so forth. But what I need to do here, and this is purely because I can't remember the name in C++ for it, is I need to, let me just get a browser open here, UE5 C++ animation data type. Oh, why is it giving me videos? Anim montage. I'm trying to remember. It's an anim sequence, I believe. Anim sequence, that's it. So, again, edit defaults only. Anim sequence, pointer, primary action animation, and we're going to have a second one, which is going to be for the secondary action. So that's where we're going to leave things off here, and the reason being is this: all of this information that we've added in, the use static mesh, this actual static mesh, the mesh offsets, and then the primary and secondary animation action, action animation I should say, are something that is going to be excuse me, I cannot talk. That is something that's going to be universal to all of these items. So, and that's the way to look at this class tree, is if the item is used, or sorry, the logic is used by two or more children of a class. So, for example, we'll take equipable. If there is logic that is going to be used by... Actually, no, we'll start with item base, because that's got 3 children. So, if there is logic that is going to be used by consumable and equipable, but not junk item, we'll still put it on the item base, because then you're only writing the code once. If there's logic that's going to be used by all 3, consumable, equipable, and junk item, well, obviously throw it on item base. But if it is unique to consumable, actually I'll change that. If it's unique to equipable and equipable's children, only leave that information on equipable. Like that logic, you don't need to add it back to item base. So because all of those things we've just added are going to be used by melee or ranged, and that doesn't matter if it's a thrown or it's a liquid container based on what we mentioned with ranged and how I want to do those, this logic is going to get logic data is going to get added to the weapon class. So now we've done that, we are going to do a quick build here and make sure all of this works, because the next thing we need to do is go through and create that melee weapon class. So this may take a moment. I've done some source control work since then, so it's got to rebuild a bunch of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and I will be back as soon as we're either in the editor or there's a build error. Alright, so here we are in the editor. So build went through fine, and there's no issues there. However, I did want to actually just take this as an opportunity to show what I was talking about regarding the weapon mesh or the equipment mesh. So in here, you can see I do have some static mesh actors for various weapons. I don't think there's any skeletal weapons in this asset pack. No, there isn't. But there has been quite a few, and it's normally things like weapons. Here you go. You can see there's a rifle and there's a pistol that are skeletal mesh because they may have animations tied to them. So let's pop this open quickly. I say that, and it takes forever to load. And what screen? There it is. I don't even know if there's any animation assets for this particular one, but take a look at the skeleton. Yeah, there's no animations for it, but you could potentially have an animation in there with the, drawing a blank on the word here. Nope, it's completely gone. Slide, that was the word I was looking for. The slide on the pistol would go back for ejecting the shell and things like that. So this is a low poly one, so I'm guessing there's no animations, but you can see here, like, the slide goes back, a chamber is a round is ejected from the chamber, and so on and so forth. So that's why you're going to want the ability to have both a skeletal or a static mesh for your equipment. Now we've got that, we're going to switch back down to our C++ stuff, get rid of our filter. So we're going to go to project, public, items. We have our weapon item base here, so we're going to expand on that, and we are going to create a C++ class derived from weapon item base. And this one we are just going to call melee item base. Now, there's not going to be a huge amount that we need to add to this class for the purpose of getting things up and running. So I'm just looking at my notes here to see everything I'd want to add to this. So in our weapon item, you can see we have our base damage, we have our handiness, and then we have the stuff we've just added, obviously. So what we would want to do in here is, because there is going to be, ultimately, once I get that far and further along in this series, there's going to be character attributes, like there's going to be strength and things like that, because ultimately, like I said, I want to try and create a somewhat realistic survival simulator. And with that, you're going to be able to adjust your character. You can have a stronger character, weaker character, smarter character, dumber character, things like that. I haven't quite fully fleshed out how I want to do that. So one of the things I do know, though, is I do want to have strength, obviously. So what we can do here, let's go back to our weapon item base and grab this one here. The edit defaults only, blueprint property, read only, meta, allow private access. Actually, yes, we can reload all, and yes, we're going to stop debugging. Excuse me. I'm going to save that because we want to keep that information, and then we'll go back to our melee item base. So in here, we want to add in that U property we just copied, and I'm going to go float strength multiplier. No, strength damage multiplier. And for this, I'm just going to set it to a default of 1. So what that's going to be is there is a 0 impact based on strength. Anything times 1 is obviously still itself. We're going to say, we'll take a hypothetical. It's a scale of 1 to 10. Well, it's not going to have any impact. A particular item would have no impact if it's strength 1 or strength 10 is the purpose of this variable. Over and above that, there is a few other things I want to add in, but they're outside of the current scope of this setup. Excuse me, I was just trying to, there we go, rearrange my seat. With that, there's things like I want to add in potential for bleed effect or poison or other things like that. Like, so say you have, going back to that bat analogy, you have a bat on its own, or example, not analogy, which is really just going to cause blunt damage. You have a bat with nails that is going to have blunt and piercing damage, but as part of that piercing damage, it can cause bleed, and other things along those lines. So I do want to account for that, but again, that's outside of the current scope of this. So with that, actually, probably shouldn't have loaded all. I should have waited because there's one more class we need to make here. And that's going to be our, the blueprint actor that we spawn on the character. So, what I'm going to do here, like I say, this is just a very basic, it's a data class that we're going to be using. So, the other thing we need to do is actually, I'm going to copy that blueprintable and add that in there, because otherwise we can't use this within the game. And this is something I'm going to be going through a little later on, once all of this stuff is done. But certain items here are not going to be blueprintable. Like, let me change you down to 2 pixels and switch you over to red quickly. So, item base obviously isn't, equipable isn't, clothing is, container is, consumable will be, weapon itself won't be, a ranged item will be, thrown, liquid, like, these are data classes. They themselves are not meant to be an item on their own. So, the whole purpose of these is, as mentioned, they are a parent data class to add information and functionality that is going to be used by all of the child classes. So, now let me just undo that. I don't want to leave that on there. So, with that though, as mentioned, we want to hop back into the editor, because the last thing we need to do is create what is going to be the blueprint class, and it's going to be a generic one for the item that is applied to, or spawned, I should say, and attached to the character. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause this, and I will be back once we're in the editor, because we are running a little low on time this episode. Alright, so we are back in the editor, and this is actually going to be a pretty quick one to do. We're going into our C++ classes, remove our filtering there. Obviously project, public. Now it's not going to be an item. This is going to be a base class. So what we're going to do here is right click, new C++ class. This is going to be an actor. We're going to click next, and this is going to be obviously your project acronym. So TF in my case, equipped, character item base. Now it is a complex name, which that is something to also, well, I shouldn't say complex name, it's a long name. That's something to consider when you're naming your classes. The longer names mean you're obviously typing out more code when referencing things. And it's trying to find a happy medium between like acronyms. So like this could be ECI base. For equipped character item base, but ECI could stand for a lot of different things. So ultimately it's going to be down to yourself, your project, and the team that's working on your project. And even if it's just yourself, that's something, as I've mentioned before, to take into consideration. What would happen if you get successful with your project and you pull in additional help? You want to try and find that happy medium between a long name that is very explanatory. In this case, equipped character item base tells you exactly what it is. It's the item that's equipped by a character. So, However, I am going to leave it as that because I would rather type out a little longer string of code than have some question as to what the item is, or what the class is, I should say. So, okay, this time around, reload all, stop debugging. Yes, we don't need to worry about that. So, all right. So we've got our equipped item base. Well, one of the first things we want to do is we need to have on our equipped item base a reference to weapon item base. Because a weapon item, again, actually this is a case of I really should have changed the name to something different. This should have been equipped, or no, equipable. No, handheld. Either way, the weapon item base doesn't give you the name you'd be expecting. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm actually going to add it to our header because we're using it as a data object, and we're going to be storing in here the item that needs to be equipped and all of its relevant information. So I'm going to quickly clean this up with my normal formatting process, where it's private, protected, public. And again, that is not needed. You could, if you really wanted to, have private, if I could spell. Thank you. There we go. So you could have private, then you could have public, private, public, public, protected. It's not going to cause compilation issues. It's just, it's not as clean, it's not as nice, in my personal opinion. So that's why I move things around, rearrange it in an order that makes sense. So the reason why I've added this here, now that we've done that, is when this is constructed, and this is something that's going to be constructed at runtime. We're not going to have 100 of these or 1,000 of these or however many handheld items you want. We're not going to need to go through and create a blueprint class for every single one of those. It's going to be created itself, like at runtime with all of the relevant information. So weapon item base, I'm just going to grab this here. Again, this is because my spelling is atrocious. Item to use. And for ease, I'm going to copy this, and we're going to head over to our source file and throw this into the constructor. Now what this is doing is this is saying to the code is the only time we can successfully construct a and actually this might not work with Unreal. So let's run a build, and then we're also going to launch into the editor just quickly because I have some concern, because I know Unreal tries to create a class of everything. Yeah, that's what I was concerned of. So we do need to have a default constructor, that does not require an input parameter. So let's try this again once we define this. Okay, now let's try another build. So anyways, going back, the whole purpose for this is so that when we create this class at a code level, we just pass in this item here, and the class itself does all of the construction that needs to be done. It assigns all the data, everything there. So, okay, that build worked, so we're good there. Don't want this to tick, so I'm actually going to set this to false. I don't know what the default is for that. Let's actually go to declaration. You're going to let me... Default is true. So for anyone who does not know what a Boolean is at a code level, it is literally either a 0 or a 1. 0 being false, 1 being true. So this tells me straight away, by default, everything is set to tick. Not a fan of that, but fair enough. So figuring that out, we're going to turn this off on both the default constructor and our primary constructor. Now, what other information do we need to pull out are we going to need? So we have in our weapon item and our equipable item, we have a skeletal mesh or a static mesh, depending. So we're going to need that. So in our private section, we are going to go uProperty. Actually, I'm not even going to call it a uProperty. I'm going to just leave it as a local one. uSkeletal mesh component. Trying to think what I want to. Skeletal item. Static mesh component. Static item. So what we're going to want to do here, and I'm going to just finish these two up and then we're going to end the episode. We'll carry on in the next episode for this, but so in here, excuse me, actually, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to make a quick change here. We do not need to know about all the internal workings of the weapon item in the header file. I'm going to move this over to the source. So in here with our, I'm also going to do this quickly. No, sorry, I said I was going to finish that off. So there's a few other things I want to do for this, but in here we're going to go item to use skeletal. Actually, I made that as a protected. We're going to make a public void for that. Void, no, sorry, it's bool use static mesh const, and this is going to be in the header, return be use static mesh. All right, so what we've done here is we've just set that boolean in function up, sorry, and we're going to go if item to use static mesh else. So this is one of the very few cases you're going to see me use an if else. I do like to avoid using if else statements where possible. Personal preference, I just find it's cleaner when you're not using an if or an else, but this is one of the few cases. So if it's use a static mesh, we are going to go static item equals create default sub object use static mesh component text, and this is going to be static mesh item. Else it's going to be skeletal item equals create default sub object use skeletal mesh component text skeletal mesh item. Add some spaces in there because that's for human reading, not for the computer. So what we've done here, and this is where I'm going to end things off because we are coming up on 35 minutes. This is just the basics, but this is how we're going to go about creating the particular child component to this, what's going to be a blueprint actor, which reminds me actually, we are going to determine, okay, it's using a static mesh or it's using a skeletal mesh. So with that though, folks, I'm going to end things off here. Next episode, we're going to continue on. There's some more functionality we need to add in here because right now there's no way of pulling out these mesh. There is a way of pulling out the skeletal mesh, but not the static mesh. And there's other things we need to do there. So, hey there, folks. So last episode we finished off getting things set up with the melee weapon item, which is the data class that we're going to be using for all of that. And then we started work on what is going to be the actual item that is physically placed in the character's hand. So from that, we went through, we created our basic setup here where we have our skeletal mesh component and our static mesh component. One thing I did realize between is we do need that U property. So I'm going to grab this here. Just because it is a U property, we're going to make some tweaks to it. Visible anywhere. And we're going to copy this and move that over. And the reason being for this is I want to be able to, like, through the outliner, I want to be able to look at the details of a character and see the item and make sure all that information that's on there is correct. So now, ended off saying, well, we do have some of the logic we need to actually assign the item here. We don't have everything. So the first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to actually work on the skeletal mesh side of this. So skeletal item, set skeletal, if this wants to move, well, actually work. Set skeletal mesh, item to use, get character mesh. And what that'll do is that'll assign the skeletal mesh to, from the item information to the one that's within this world actor. So now for the static mesh, we don't have a function for that. So what we're going to do is we are going to, it's in our weapon item base, we're going to add a very basic function here. Actually, I'm going to make this U function blueprint callable just in case, because as I've mentioned in the past, you want to try and make things exposed to blueprints where it makes sense, simply because you may have someone who's not a programmer who needs to access some of the stuff within blueprints. And I realized I missed blueprint callable on these guys here. So as I was saying, that we want to add in a function to, actually these need to be public as well, because they need to be exposed to that object we just created. So this is going to be U static mesh pointer get character mesh. No, because that's going to override get static character mesh. Const return, and what did we call this? Weapon mesh. I believe I have to make some tweaks to this so it's actually exposed correctly within blueprints. I think it's T subclass of, thinking about it. But anyway, so now that we've got that, what we're going to do here is a static item, set static mesh, item to use, get static character mesh. And helps if I could spell mesh. All right, so that's some basics there. Now there's obviously going to be a few other things we need to do. What I want to do, though, is first and foremost is, as I just said, I need to make sure I actually have these right. If we look at our equipable item, that's the source, not the header. Nope, it was just that. That was what we needed. Okay, so get rid of that. So with this, we do have the basic setup for a weapon item. We have the utter basics for our melee item. and we've started work on the character item. Well, there's a couple other things we're going to want to do. We are going to want to add in, actually we set this to not tick, so we don't need our tick function declared. And get rid of that to save on milliseconds or nanoseconds potentially of compilation time. But we're going to also want a couple other functions in here, which are going to be f transform. Do I want to pass a reference? Yeah, I'm going to pass a reference. Get item, excuse me, offset, const. This is going to be return. Actually, no, I'm going to do this in the header, the source file. This is going to be a U function, blueprint callable, blueprint callable, blueprint pure, because we're not going to be changing anything, blueprint pure. And then we also are going to, before we can finish this function off, we're going to need to add that to our weapon item to be able to pass over or pass through our offset information. So again, this one we don't need to expose to blueprint because we have this other function where we need it. So no, just for sanity's sake, we can expose it to blueprint. It's not an issue. So f transform reference get mesh offset const, and this one we're going to put in the header return mesh offsets. Modifiers dropped in binding reference of type L. Yeah, so we can't pass that through as a reference because const reference. Yeah, I dislike that, but oh well, it is what it is. So, okay, so we're going to create the definition here, and all this is going to be is oh, we don't actually store this information anywhere. I just realized that. So grab these item data. Let's call it that. So up here, and that's actually going to save, make some changes to this. So item data equals item to use, and we're going to change some of these out. So instead of item to use within all of these, we're going to use our local variable. And then in our get item offset, we're just going to return that item data get mesh offset. Now, there is a potential for this to be invalid or a null pointer. So there's a couple of things we're going to need to account for with that. And that's going to be actually up here. If is valid item to use, return. We do not want to execute anything in here. And here, let's go return is valid item data. F transform so that'll just pass through generic transform. All right, so with that, the little case, protection case we've got here is we basically say if it's not valid, we're not going to execute any of this because obviously, well, we can't sign an invalid and we can't use the information off an invalid item. So let's try build, and then we're going to hop in the editor and see if we can actually make a blueprint of this, because honestly, I've mentioned in the past, I've not actually made it this far with any of my projects before. So this might not actually work, and I may have just wasted a couple of episodes. But that's actually, again, for anyone who's new to the series, just jumping in, that's actually part of what I'm trying to do with this series, is I'm wanting to not just document the success, where, oh, this worked, this is how you want to do it. I want to document the problems, the things that didn't work, and just like general programming and stuff along the way, because I've watched so many tutorials online, be it YouTube or other platforms. Oh, got a build error. Oh, it's because this is unknown. Let's try that again. Anyways, I've been watching so many videos and tutorials, and it's always just a case of, this is what to do. Alright, so we're back in the editor. Let's see if we can actually set up that base template for the blueprint that we need to spawn. Now equipped item base, select that, dev equipped item. It's equipped character item, I understand that, but no, yeah, because I went equipable item. Equipped character, okay. Get rid of that one, we don't need it. That's the one we want. TF equipped character item base. Okay, let's try that. Use my naming convention correctly. Dev underscore BP underscore. Let's open that up and see if things are working. Okay, so it does look like it is. Starting with tick enabled. Am I missing something there? Oh, I'm missing something there, I should say. Get over tick. Primary actor. Tick enabled. Start with tick enabled. Okay, that's the other one. I'm pretty sure, having just looked at that, let's go to the declaration. Again, that is always on, so well, I can understand why Epic would want to do that. But at the same time, yeah, not a fan of tick always being enabled. But either way, so we'll go back into the editor for now and just take a quick look. What did we set up in here? We should have skeletal, static, and item data, but there's going to be nothing created for that. These two, because what's happening there, excuse me, is this one is being used for the constructor, not this one. So, because of that, static item and skeletal item shouldn't exist. And you can see they don't exist. And if we go static, yeah, skell, so they're not there. So the other thing I want to do, and this is just for the purpose of the debugging, is I'm just going to copy both of these create into our generic constructor, because I want to be able to see those items here in the details panel for the item. So save this, close out of this, and I'm actually going to close out of the editor this time. So now that we've got that, though, we are going to go through and I'm trying to think. there's going to be a collision overlap that we need. So what we're going to want to create one of those. So let us grab that basic stuff from, we'll do it from the player character because it's the last place we used it. Not randomized base, and I also need the header file, not the source. So we have the collision overlap for, where is it? There you go. What am I wanting to say here? My brain is not functioning. The collision overlap for, say, a melee weapon. So we're going to add that in. So we're going to go to our header class. This is going to be is it protector or private? Oh, it's public. So we're going to throw that into our public section then. And we're going to obviously need to rename it because it's not interaction trigger overlap. On melee collision overlap begins. We don't need an overlap ends because when you hit something, we only worry about the first initial impact. I'm not going to be worried. Well, you could be with your own setup, but for my case with my project, I'm not going to be worried about like the side effects of after I've stopped hitting them. Yes, it could be, and actually it's something literally just popped into my head, and I'm going to make a note of this. But you could have something like, how long were you in contact? So a difference of a glancing blow versus like a full serious connect. So that's actually something I may think about over the course of the next little while. And if that's the case, we'll add in an end overlap. But we're just going to quickly create the definition for that. And then what it's going to be is we want to include our TF character in here. Actually, I'm going to TF character. There it is. Sorry, brain is just not wanting to function today. I'm going to grab that. We're going to include that in our headers, and we're going to go ATF character pointer, like we've done before, as TF character equals cast ATF character other actor, and then actually it's if that is successful, and what is it, overlap, is that the one we want? Actually, let's take a quick look here. U primitive component, other component, sorry, other comp. And this is where let me just hop back to our character class for a second here. Actually, no, because that's actually core character. Excuse me. That is why we're using the capsule component for all of the characters. And I had mentioned earlier in the series, it was a question on a video, but it was a comment asking about locational damage. Now, again, that is something I intend to add, but that is something that you add in after the fact, because you need to determine what locations you're going to have, be it leg, torso, arm, head, like those four, technically six, left leg, right leg, but those four distinct areas, or are you going to expand that further? And then you need to have the respective collision objects for those so you can tell what they are. I believe, let me look at the heat source a second. Yeah. And yes, we do need to add that in there. So, what are they under? Engine component. Sphere component. So, All right. Sorry. Yeah, we have to do that outside. So we're going to change this to a dual if statement. Instead of trying to be fancy with 2 and 1, if the other components is a capsule component, and if we can cast it to a TF character. And just for explanation, actually, because I realize this is a bit of a weird one. What we had here, we were getting an error message, and that error is a value of type bool cannot be used to initialize an entity or type of character. And the reason for this is this itself is not a Boolean expression, but the reason why this works, we're including it on its own. It would be the same as, and I don't think this is even going to work, if it is valid. It's effectively like that. It's saying as long as this cast succeeds and this as TF character is not a null pointer, then we're going to say this is a good single Boolean. But we cannot combine these with another one because, I don't know. But it's the best explanation I can think of. So, well, it's pretty simple with this. It's going to be as TF character, take damage. We added that functionality in. So, well, what are we going to be adding there? So this is going to be our item data. Well, we don't have a functionality for that. So we need to go back to our weapon item base and take a look. We've got base damage. Well, we don't have any functionality for that. So we need to add in, we're going to grab another one there. We're going to add a virtual, thank you for being able to spell, float get weapon damage const. And the reason for this being a virtual is we are going to be overriding that in our melee weapon and our our ranged weapons, and it's going to be based off of the damage, things like that. Return, and in this case is base damage. And with our melee weapon, just to start with, it's going to be a float. I've already forgotten what I called that. Get weapon damage. And I can't even spell damage, apparently. Float get weapon damage const override. Wait for that to go through there. And this is where the strength modifier was coming in. So this is where, for now, base damage times strength modifier. And then I'm just going to add in a to-do note. To-do. I know we just cleaned this up, but the whole purpose of this is so future me can find these things we need to address. So just add in a note, call function to calculate strength modifier value, I should say. Alright, so now we've got that. Well, we've got this get weapon damage that's on the U melee item base, but let me close out of these. I keep going into ones I don't need to right now. Our equipable item, it's just a weapon item base, and that's, again, for anyone who understands, I apologize. I'm also trying to help teach some C++ in this process. So the way this works is our weapon item base, I'm actually going to save everything here, has this function, get weapon damage. It's a public function, so in here, well, actually, sorry, in this code, it knows that that function's present. What we've done with our melee item base by saying it's an override is if we are, like, if this get weapon damage call from weapon item base is called, use our function instead. Use this one. That's why it needs to be, actually, should be public. I forgot to add that in there. Good thing I was explaining because I was creating some bad code there. It needs to have the same declaration and everything needs to be the same. And in our weapon item base, it's a public function. This U function information is carried over, and then we'll call this function instead. So get weapon damage. All right, well, we need to have a damage event, a controller, and a damage causer. So how did I do that in NPC? That was with a byte, I believe. Or did we not create a dedicated function for that? Or is it just overriding the one that was already there? Take damage? Yeah, we just override the pre-existing one by the looks of it. Yeah, we're overriding that one there. So, well, here's an easy way. Let's see, take damage. We're going to say the entire project and see where I've called that function. Because I swore we've already done this once and my brain is not wanting to... Okay, that's the override there. That's the one we're working on. Okay, here we go. Oh, okay. Right, that's it. So we're just passing in an F damage event, and that was what it was. We needed this header here to create that. To just be a new F damage event. Now, the next one is we need a controller for the event instigator and the damage causer. So we need a way to say who is the... I'm just going to do this for null pointer. This is just quickly so I can move on without it throwing a hissy fit at me. We need a way to know what those are. We do not want that to be this item, because if you hit somebody with a bat, a person doesn't think the bat hit them. They think you hit them. And that goes for everything. It's an extension of the person wielding the weapon. So we need a way to assign that information. So what we also want in here is we're going to add in class ATF character pointer owner. Then we're going to add in I'm trying to think how many functions. Just the one function. Void set owner. It's going to be ATF character pointer. I'm going to put lowercase owner in there just for the sake of case sensitivity. Character. That would be... Help me if I could spell. Alright. And this is a very basic one, and it's something that will be used towards the start of the item creation process when something's equipped. So it's going to be owner equals owner. So we've got this basic setup now. So up here in our damage event, we're going to just quite simply say owner get controller and pass over owner. The reason why we can use both of the, well, we can use this because it's getting the controller, which is what it needs. It's the A controller for the event instigator. And then the damage causer, we pass through the owner because everything, when you follow it back in our hierarchy of classes, is considered an A actor. So all of these ultimately will fall back down to A actor. They just can take some slightly different paths to get there. Like TF actor is a direct child of, but TF character is a child of character, which is a child of pawn, which is a child of a actor, or of actor. So now we hit 35 minutes, so I'm going to quickly go over the purpose of this. And again, this is going to extend into another episode. This is taking a little longer than I thought, but there's quite a few things to cover with this. So what we've done here is we have set up a generic collision event for assigning a overlap of like that to a, we have created a generic collision event that we can use to assign to the item should it have a melee functionality. Now there's obviously a lot more we need to do, because right now if we just assign this to the weapon as the players walking through the world, they could just literally like walk into, while holding a bat, into something and cause some damage with it, and we don't want that. So that's some of the stuff we're going to address in the next episode. Hey there, folks. So last episode we ended off getting things finished up with creating the on melee collision overlap event. But right at the end of the episode, I did point out that as it stands right now, if we were to use, this brain is not working still. If we were to use this function for the collision event, the player just walking into something without even swinging a weapon, or even an NPC walking into something without swinging a weapon, and it collided, would cause damage. Now, yeah, within reason, you could see that happening. Like players walking around, not paying attention, they turn, smash their bat into a window. Yes. However, to try and process that within code is actually a little complex. Yes, you could have, okay, he's intent, like a flag for swinging or not, and if it's not swinging, we're going to do like a tenth of the damage, things like that. But a bat accidentally banging into something versus, say, a stick banging into something, it gets a little complicated when you're trying to work out things to that extent. So I personally, in my own project, have decided it's literally, I only want a melee weapon to cause damage when the player is swinging. So the next thing I want to do is we need to add another boolean in here. I'm going to copy our top section where it's visible anywhere for our U properties. Actually going to throw that on owner so we can see it's getting set. Boolean B is attacking. We're going to set that to false by default. And then we're going to add in a blueprint function, or a function I should say that is callable to blueprints. Void set attacking. Const bool reference B attack. And you can all probably figure out where I'm going with this one. We're going to be setting this flag based by this function. And what are you complaining about there? Got to rename this function. Set owning character, because we're trying to override a function that we already had. So we're going to create this definition. Head back here. What are you complaining about there? Yeah, it just hasn't caught up yet. So copy that, and we're going to fix that. Set owning character. B is attacking equals B attack. And again, the whole purpose for this is just a flag that can be called, and a function that can be called to set a flag, either true or false, that we're attacking. And the reason why we're wanting to expose this to blueprints, this will fix itself once IntelliSense catches up. Sorry. The reason why we're wanting to set this and expose it to blueprint is because we're potentially going to be... Okay, I gotta change that as well. We're gonna want to be calling these on like animations and stuff as well, or exposing it through blueprints for potentially with animation. So we'll want to like call back to the obviously class flow or class tree of owner and everything to say, okay, we've started our animation. We're gonna consider this. We're now attacking. Okay, we're at the end of our swing. We're going to consider this as no longer attacking. So, and the reason for that, there's a lot of cases, and I believe I mentioned this on the NPC video as well. There's a lot of cases I found where it's like they almost use ray tracing, or I don't even want to say ray tracing. They use they do a calculation. It's like, oh, this attack animation has started. You are within the attack range of this enemy. You're going to get hit. Doesn't matter if you stepped out or not. And that I find incredibly frustrating, because if you as a person or a player specifically have the ability to react and step back from a target before they are able to hit you, it shouldn't hit you. Like, I know I mention them a lot. It's actually a game I like playing, that's why, but that happens a lot. I found in 7 Days to Die. It's like the way it's done, they don't have like a collision sphere in the zombies' hands. They have this or collision detection sphere, I should say. They go, oh, the player was 100 units away from the zombie when the attack started. They're going to get hit. Doesn't matter that the player stepped away. So that's just a personal grievance. I'm just going to change that to owning care. But yeah, so that's why I'm putting the effort in to try and do this in a way that's different. There is a lot of other ways out there. I've seen there's ray tracing where they sort of like do this arc trace. I don't like ray tracing. It can get pretty resource intensive, and especially because potentially a lot of characters with melee weapons running around. Well, actually, that's how I would do zombies, is I'd have a melee weapon. I'm doing air quotes here, you can't see them, but I'd do melee weapons, which are just invisible hands, that would be placed on each zombie's hands and things like that. So, anyways, let's fix this owning care. We're going to go back here and fix this. We want this, not anything else. So we've got that. So now that we have this, well, we've got an easy one. If not B is attacking, we are just going to ignore it. It's plain and simple. We don't care. The overlap event is not happening. Now, we do need a way to actually determine at a code level, do we need to assign this? So, well, to do that, we need a way within our class information to determine, well, is it a melee item or a ranged item? And we don't have that. So, I'm trying to think. But no, at the same time, I may want to include, like, hitting something with a buttstock. So, Actually, yeah, no, that is exactly where I was going with that. So we're going to add another property to our weapon item base. Edit defaults only. Bool B has melee collision equals. I'm going to default that to false. So the reason why for this, and like use static mesh has melee collision, I'm defaulting these to false, is these are things that are going to be set based on the item, and you're going to be going through and creating data items, so you're going to need to like pay attention, make things, make sure things are set up properly. But I don't want everything by default to have this, because that you're talking about, you're going to give things like a glass jar a melee attack. Yes, smash over somebody's head, I understand. I don't want to go to that level. Glass jars are going to be a liquid container. At most, they're going to be a throwable because it's a Molotov, but things like that. So, anyways, with that, we now have this B has melee collision. Well, we need a function for that. And yes, I understand I could just make this a public one, but I don't want code or actually blueprints to be able to change this. I only want this to be editable. Editable? Yeah, editable in the base data class blueprint. I do not want anywhere else to be allowed to make changes to these. So that's the whole purpose of anyone not familiar with C++ or programming principles. I shouldn't say that's the whole purpose. It's one of the main purposes about private getters and setters. For anyone who's got some C# background, what we're doing here is it's a public getter, a private setter. So, well, technically protected setter, but the reason for that is this is just a parent data class. So anyway, so we need a bool get has melee collision. We want this to be a const because, again, we don't want this value to be changed. We want whatever this returns to be the value. So return B has melee. So simple as that. Now over in our main class, we want to go down to our leave that, not doing it in here. So in our override class where we're passing in item to use, we're just going to add that here. So static item on collision, no, on overlap, on component begin overlap dot add dynamic. We're going to pass in this, and we're going to pass in a reference to our overlap function. And we're done. And we can copy and paste that to our skeletal item as well. And, well, okay, sorry, throwing that in there, we need to use that Boolean value. So if item data has melee, and this is again specifically for basically, does this have a melee attack? So okay, so now I'm trying to think what else I've got to do. Oh, right. Primary, secondary. Okay, so I will be upfront and honest. I do not know if this logic is going to work. So this is one of those, we're going to experiment, we're going to find out. If it doesn't work, I'll have to figure out a different way. So we need to have a way to use our primary and secondary actions. So It's really getting picky about things. But okay, now what are you complaining about? Function parameter owning care cannot be defined. Setting on care is already defined in scope. Equipped character item base. What? That's okay. You're complaining about your own function here, IntelliSense. Owning care cannot be defined in lowercase versus uppercase. It's not the same. Okay, let's just TF care. Or is that because I didn't change it in the source file? Oh, and then, yeah. So this is where, again, this is where when you start having very large parent-child chains, I have to open up my Krita window here. So that would be, for example, liquid container down. I'm pointing at the screen, not using the mouse. So liquid container here has a parent-child chain that goes to range, to weapon, to equip, to item base. That, in terms of programming, that's not a huge item chain, but the problem we're running into here is, or I'm trying to explain here, is we're trying to name something in liquid container the same as something that's up in possibly item base, and it's causing a conflict. So just trying to find ways around that and to get this to go away. Blueprint pure. Oh yeah, that one's 100% my fault. I threw pure on a void function. Function parameter owning care, which doesn't exist, is already defined in scope. Okay, it's either they've got rid of case sensitivity, which isn't the case because we've fixed it. It's completely different. This is just IntelliSense is being weird. So I'm going to try build while I keep talking about what I was going to say, though, regarding primary and secondary actions. So we've got over in our weapon item base, we have a primary action and a secondary action. We have a blueprint version and our normal code version. And I was trying to figure out how did we want to do it? And ultimately what I have decided to attempt, and this is where I'm saying attempt because weapon item base is a data class more than anything. What I want to do here is just add in public functions. Yeah, we have a successful build, but it's still complaining, so that is 100% IntelliSense. But anyways, we're going to grab this one because it's not a pure function. Void primary action. Void secondary action. And this is where, like I said, I'm guessing that this is going to work. So if this doesn't, like I said, we'll have to figure this out. I'm going to go to here, and it's going to be item data, primary action, item data, secondary action. So the whole thing here is these actions I intended to set up through blueprints. And the reason being is there's animations that may play, there's sound effects that may play, there is multiple different things that at a code level I don't like trying to interact with. Playing sound effects, playing animations specifically, and that, because I don't work well with those at a code level, I've tried, I just can't get the knack for it. It may just be a case I haven't spent enough time on it, but this is me personally. So the whole purpose of this is we have what is going to be code calling to what should be a blueprint function. Now, as it stands, if nothing's implemented, it's going to drop through to these two, which is just saying primary action not defined, secondary action not defined. So I should throw breakpoints on those so I can freak out and forget I did that when that happens. So ultimately, though, I'm going to close out of this and just make sure. I think we've got the very basics. The only thing we don't have is a deconstructor. And that I am a little concerned about, because we've got this here. We're binding a bunch of things. Well, not binding a bunch. We're adding 2 binds. We've got potential pointer memory leaks and things like that. But I'm pretty sure Epic's garbage collection is pretty good, and all of this should be cleaned up. However, that is something that you would need to do through debugging and dev testing and resource consumption monitor and stuff like that. So ultimately, though, what I think is we've got this to a point where we might actually be able to get things moving here to move this stuff into the game itself. So we just had a successful build, did a couple other things. So I'm going to do one more build, hop into the editor, and then I'm going to see if I can get some blueprint work started for this. So I'll be back once we're in the editor. Alright, so for the observant of you, I'm not actually in the editor. And the reason being for that is I've actually missed a very critical step still for being able to do anything in the editor. And that's actually equipping this. So what we need to do for that is actually need to go back to our character class here. I'm just going to close out of all of this for ease. So if we go back to our base character, we have, let me just minimize all of this without muting my mic, because that's apparently my key combination for that. We have our equip items. I probably could have just scrolled down. And you can see in here, we have set weapon. And well, that's not actually what we want to do. We need to make some changes to this, because it's taking a use skeletal mesh. And this is where, after some additional planning on my part, this actual equip item isn't the function we want. So in here, I'm going to leave this, but what we're going to do is add a logger item here. Get instance, add message, error level, error. Called with weapon. So the reason why, and I'll explain that, is in here you can see we're just equipping an item, so we've got the slot and the item mesh. Well, we need more information, and what we actually need when we're equipping a weapon is we need it to come through as either an item base or as a weapon item base, because we need that information. So we're going to go to our character header, down to our equip functions, and we're going to add in another one here, void equip weapon, and this is going to be class, and let me actually open that up. Item. So the whole purpose for this is we're going to call this if we're equipping a handheld item. Yeah, so we're going to, not go to create the definition. So we're going to create that definition there. Now you can see we have all of our set functions and stuff. These have been put down here at the bottom. We're not worried about that. And we can actually get rid of set weapon. We'll go back into here. Let's find that where it's a private one. Equip functions. We can get rid of set weapon because we're not using that logic. So now we have this uitem base. What we need to do is we need to go through and create a instance of the, so where we're bouncing around, equipped character item base. So I'm going to grab this header because we're going to need to, this include, because we're going to need that. Now, just quickly, I've noticed this, but I'll mention it. In here, you can see we don't actually have an include for the logger, but it will be one of these other classes. Specifically, no, it's not that. One of these other ones, so it's going to actually be coming in from our stat line component because it's the first one. Actually, no, AI controller might have that. We have logger in there? No. Sorry, sidetracked, but I do like to explain this stuff because I know sometimes it can get a little confusing. So stat line component. One of these is going to have it in the header file already. Is it the character header file? Creature type, equipment slot, save actor interface. Okay, maybe not. Where is that coming in from? It's not in there, not in there. Equipable item base. I'm now actually confused myself. Interesting. Where is that getting pulled in from then? Well, instead of sitting here digging into that and wasting episode time for this, we don't have the include here because somewhere within either this include stack or this include stack, one of these already has the logger as an include. So that's what the pragma once is for, is we only need to compile it once. If one of the parent includes has that information, use it from there. So anyways, now that we've got that, what we need to do is we need to spawn a instance of the equipped character item base. So, well, we have that logic over in our tree base, and I just want to look at that because obviously we're going to use the very similar information. So we have our pointer to the item, get world, spawn actor, some information for it. So and this is where I'm not 100% sure if this logic is going to work either. So we want ATF equip character item base item equals get world spawn actor, and then we want to use ATF equipped character item base item. Or maybe we actually have to I'm actually not 100% sure how to do this one because we need to... something like that, but we can't call that. Actually, that might be my own mistake there. Because we made those private, didn't we? No, they're public. So what? What are you complaining about? Line 13 is inaccessible. I've never done this before. Actually, let's move that back up, and I'm going to go public. Yeah, so actually what I'm going to do here, folks, we've hit the 30-minute mark. I'm going to end the episode here. I'm going to do a little more investigation at a code level between episodes just to try and figure out what it actually is I need to do, or if I've actually gone about this entirely the wrong way. So, yeah, because I now just hit this stumbling point where I'm not actually sure how I want to do this. So, hey there, folks. So this episode is likely going to be a little bit of a shorter one, just because while I was digging into how I needed to go about the spawn actor stuff for the equipable item, found out and realized both at the same time, because I actually knew this, but for some reason I'd completely forgotten about it. This methodology of a constructor with an input parameter does not work for Unreal Engine. This is my base C++ background coming out. Methodology I've used in a very few other places. So this method isn't going to work. So, to get around that, we need to go through and change up a little bit how we're going to do this. So instead of having a constructor with the input, we're actually going to have a void initialize. I can't spell today, it seems. Void initialize. So we're going to grab that. We're going to go into our source file and we're going to rename this one to this and declare it a void. Again, void, not coid. And there's a few other things we need to do in here because this function is actually going to be called after the initial constructor. So primary actor tick, we don't need that information. We're going to leave this validator in there because, again, if we're calling this with an invalid item, actually, no, we're going to change that because this is the clear everything out. This is the unequipped. So, obviously, we're going to leave this in here, but we need to make some modifications. So, first of all, these aren't going to be creating the default items. What they are, because they are going to be created as part of the generic constructor. What we are going to do, though, is we're going to be removing the unused component. It's pointer destroy component. So, to explain, within this process, if we are a static mesh item, we're going to destroy the skeletal mesh. If we're a skeletal mesh, we are going to destroy the static mesh. And that is going to remove the unneeded component. Now, obviously, we have our static mesh, set static mesh, that's still correct. If it has melee collision, we're still going to do that. And these can be done on the fly. Like, you can do these at runtime. You can add and remove this logic. It's not ideal, but you can. Now, if we're saying... actually, no, we're just going to remove the item if we're unequipping. So don't need to worry about that. We're just going to leave this as is. This is just a catch statement. Actually, we're going to go logger. And in here, we don't have that reference to the logger, so include logger, get instance, add message, error level, error, called with invalid item. So the whole reason for this change, and why I said this is going to be a shorter episode, is I really just wanted to cover this as I realized it's somewhat of an important one to cover, and I wanted to go through all of this up front. So that is everything we need there. Okay, so with that, now that we have this set up, we can go back to our character and we can finish off what we were doing. So if is valid, not is valid item. I'm just going to put a comment in here, unequip behavior. No, it's not going to let me go that way. So if item is equal to null pointer, return. And actually, we're going to create that or add that in our definition. By default, it's going to be a null pointer. Actually, let's check this. Go to definition. So we are also going to want to expand this. I just realized we're going to want to expand to say left hand, right hand for handiness. So that's something I'm going to need to figure out as well, because it's going to be based on quite a few factors there. But either way, so now that we've got that, we are going to have ATF equip character item base equipped item equals get world spawn actor ATF equipable character item base, and then if it's not valid, equipped item log error and return. Otherwise, we're going to equipped item, I should say, initialize with item. So just to explain this, what we're doing here is on the character class, when we're equipping a handheld item, we're going to call this equip weapon function, passing in that uitem base, weapon item base, I should say, sorry. Actually, no, that is what I want. Sorry. And then from there, if it's not a valid item, it's a null pointer. That's going to be our unequipped logic, which is what we have here. We're obviously going to want to process that and remove the item, change animation states, things like that. If it's valid, we're going to create a new equipped character item base. If for some reason that spawn actor fails, obviously we want to log and return. We don't want to try and do any of the additional logic. And then what we're doing is we're passing in that uitem base to our initialize function that we just created. And in this function, we're going through, this should never happen because we are validating it here. It's a null pointer. If it's not a null pointer, it should be a valid item. But if it's not, well, we have a deeper problem, obviously. Then we're storing that reference. And then we're determining, okay, if it's a static mesh, we're going to use the static mesh. We can get rid of our skeleton mesh component. We're assigning the mesh, and then if that has should have, I should say, a collision mesh, like for melee attacks, we're going to, excuse me, we're going to add a binding for that. If we are using the skeletal mesh, obviously we're going to set the skeletal mesh, and if it should have collision behavior, we're going to add that. So what I'm going to do here is we are going to do a quick build, and we're going to see if this is going to work. Obviously this is not everything we need to do, but I just want to make sure all of this logic is going to work. So as you can see, we've got 26 items to build here. I'm going to pause the video and I'll be back. I can already see there's probably some errors going to be thrown. So, nope, that's actually one of our normal ones. So, either way, I'm going to pause the video and I'll be back once the build is done. Alright, so that build did succeed. We've got no issues with that there. With that, I think the next step we need to do now we've got this is go through and actually set this up and see if we can get this to work. So, because I know we've got this part here, I just want to see if we can get through to this spawn equipped item. If this works, then we can go through, attach the item to what is going to be a socket, and those sockets and everything are going to be something we want to lay out in our character define. That is down here. So we'll have things like left-hand socket, right-hand socket. So with that though, I'm going to again pause the video. I know I'm pausing it a lot, but I want to just try and get this to be a shorter video. Alright, so we are back in the editor. So we need to do a couple of things here. So that is our dev test blueprint. Let's take a quick look there and open that up. Open our defaults. Okay, so it does have a static and a skeletal. That is what we want there. And I'm going to weapon item base. This is going to be dev bp weapon test 01. Open that up. Now in the right hand side here, you can see base damage of 1, use static mesh. Do we have bat as one of them? Okay, what was that mesh called? Let's take a quick look here. That was in our mega post-apocalyptic characters. We'll just filter to static mesh. Bita. Okay. Obviously that creator of that is not English, so add that there. We're going to leave all of this blank. And I already realize this is probably not going to work because we're not passing in the information as a T subclass. But let's check. So we're going to open up our third-person blueprint here. I'm going to move the content panel browser out of the way. So we already have some debug logic. I thought I saved this in a commented section. I must not have. Oh no, it's up here. That was 4 for the hat. I'm going to move this over as well because that's our save game stuff. debug testing. And I should change that comment to just debug testing instead of equipment. And expand that to include all of these as well. Now I'm going to repurpose 4 for what we're going to do here. So we want to equip weapon. And yeah, that needs to be a T subclass of. So I'm going to compile and save this, and we're going to close out of the editor, and we're going to make those changes in the code, because obviously you need to do that. Oh, and this is just something I was looking through. Notice while I was building, there was this error for the save component data. And all I did to address that is component class was set like this. And I just added equals null, which initializes it as a null value. So, okay, so we need to go to our character here for a second, and T subclass of, and we don't need the pointer, so I'm going to also copy that, and we're going to go into the source file and make that same change. And this is probably going to, yep, we need to do that in the equipped item as well. So there's our header. We need to change that, and our source, and change that. All right, so we're going to launch another build and run into the editor. Oh, no, build cancel. I already see an error. Okay, let's see if I can pull this up here. 1 second. All right, so we do actually need to make a couple other changes. So change our property type to T subclass of class U weapon item base. This is going to break a couple other things. All right, you can see in here. So I'm just going to type this out quickly to make sure. Item data default. I believe, no, get default object dot use, no, I'm trying to remember how we did that. Do we have that in our tree base? Yeah, okay, how did we do that in our tree base? Or was that our inventory component? I know we've done something with this before, so, oh, I think it's inventory component. Is it just dot? Is that all I've screwed up? Item data dot get default object. Yeah, okay. That tells you how familiar I am with this code. And this is something you may deal with quite infrequently or frequently. You write code, you don't touch it for a little while, you forget about it. So all we need to do there is correctly replace the right chunk of code. All we need to do here is where we're just using the item data as a pointer, just change that to the item data.get default object. So we'll try this again. No, there's still build errors in here. What are you complaining about now? Oh, up here. These are all the same things. So and having to do this actually makes me question these two even more, if this is going to work. So, all right, that should be all the build errors fixed this time around. So again, I'm going to pause the video, and I will be back as soon as we are back in the engine. All right, so we did actually have a build error, and this is again on my part. Completely forgot about some of this. We're missing an include here because this right here. So let's see if this gets fixed. I'll actually scroll up to where right here, this is where things seem to be going wrong. So let's see if this include fixes the issue. No, it's a data type. Sorry, data type. No, item, sorry. Items, weapon item base. And let's see if this fixes that build issue. And I'm not going to pause the video this time because it should fail very quickly if it fails. But yeah, so while this goes through, I will yak a little bit. So one of the issues you may stumble across is what I ran into today is you write the code in a particular way, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, that doesn't actually work. Yeah, there you go, that fixed the issue. Didn't actually work, so I got to rewrite things. So, and this is why I've mentioned it myself several times throughout this series so far. Try and document and plan things as best you can, simply because you're going to run into points where you've tried to plan things out and things aren't working as intended, and you need to change your approach because of that. So anyways, now that that's done and we're in the editor, let's take a quick look at the third person blueprint here. So you can see here we have our old node, we have that's failed, and our new node. You can just right click and refresh nodes, and it'll get rid of that broken node. So on the press of 4, we're going to equip dev weapon test 01. So I'm also going to throw a breakpoint here because I want to actually be able to step through this. So move this over, play in editor, and hit 4. I'm going to bring this over. So we're here. We're in here. Now I'm going to hit F10 I hit F10 to move it forward, hit F10 again. We hit our code here. Okay, so that is correct. We did correctly spawn the actor. And then I'm going to go into, that is, where's the header? Header source. Let's go into our initialize, throw a breakpoint there, and I'm going to hit continue. Okay, item to use is valid. Oh, item data. Okay, this needs to change. All right, so now this is probably, so it does not support, ignore. Okay, hit F10. Oh no, it doesn't. That's just the way it's looping through it twice. So we're destroying the skeletal, we're setting the mesh, we're getting that, and then interesting. Okay, so we're going to do that. I'm going to close out of this and then equip. I'm going to go find that, and it's probably F8. Select U and F. Yeah. So there you go. You can see we have spawned that. The mesh is spawned in. Obviously, we're not connecting it to the parent character. We're not assigning anything to it. So we're getting there, though. This is the majority of what we need done for this part. So I am actually going to end this episode here, because the next episode is going to be going through creating the sockets, getting those names done, and then actually like connecting it to the parent character. So, hey there, folks. So last episode we got the basic setup for spawning in the equipped item on our character. So just hop in here and hit 4. And then I'm going to press F8 to bounce out of the... Oh, I think it's trying to load up a breakpoint I had thrown. Forgot to remove that. Yeah, it's loading that up on the other side. Let me just get rid of that breakpoint and continue. So in here you can see we're spawning in a item based on the information we're pulling in from the equip weapon function, which is the weapon item base. Using that, we're trying to spawn it in. It's correct. And then we're telling it to initialize. Now, what we have here, though, is the one issue of... let me just get rid of that breakpoint. Hop back in here. Now I'll hit F8. If we go over all the way here to the corner of the map, which is our 0, 0 location, you can see the bat we spawned in is in the 0, 0 location. It's not actually attached to our character. What we need to do for that is have some sockets and do a create a join there. So what we're going to do for that to start with, let me just pull up our content browser and bring it over. Now this is going to be dependent on your own skeletons for your skeletal mesh actors. But if we go in here and we go to our mega post character, because it's the skeletons we are using. Actually, I'm going to open up our third person blueprint so we can get to the right one. Let's quickly do that. Our root mesh is our head, so we're going to go find that in the content browser. We open that up. Okay, I'll just switch this out for the content browser here. So in here you can see on the left it has the structure outlined, which is our standard Unreal skeleton. What we are looking for here is the hands. If I actually drop back to the skeletal actor, if we go to our hands, so we have... Oh, it's not going to let me. There it is. So if you right click on it, add socket, and then we're going to name this. Actually, this is where we want to do it in our character define files. I know I had mentioned that last episode. So in here, we've defined the byte socket name. What we also want to do in here is define right hand socket. And then we're also going to define left hand socket. Both of these are going to be an F name. And I'm trying to think, because these aren't just NPCs, so I'm going to go char for short for character, right hand socket. And now again, you can use whatever naming convention you want for these. Left hand socket. So now we've got those defined. We want to make sure we use this exact format and casing and everything. So I'm going to copy that, go back into the editor, and then this is the, oh, that's the left hand. So where's our right hand? Right hand. Add socket, rename that, paste that in there. And we're going to grab the left-hand socket as well. So what we've done there is we have added a socket, which is basically a virtual connection point to the master skeleton for our character. And that socket allows other things to be attached to it and keep the exact same location. Now, if we zoom out, you can see it's down here. If we select our hand, it is right at the... Sorry, I'm holding a coffee here. You can see it's right at the what would be the wrist joint. So that is where, as I'd mentioned in previous episodes, we are going to want to have those offset adjustments for the, like the transform adjustment, sorry, for the weapon. So, all right, so now how do we go about getting this connected up? So I'm going to close out of this. I'm going to make sure all is saved. You can use either the bottom right. There's this one here. It's saying all is saved, so everything's good there. But if we go File, Save All, just to make sure. And actually, I'm going to open up that skeleton again, and you can see those sockets are still there. Now, if you have multiple root skeletons, you obviously are going to need to add this to every root skeleton. Right now, the way things have gone with this project, we don't have multiple root skeletons. There's no character customization yet. That is something I do plan on adding in later in the series, but that's not something that's a core functionality that you need in place for the game. So, physics asset. All right, so now that we've done that, I'm actually going to close out of the editor here because we're going to be working on a lot of code for the next little while. Okay, sorry, just having a quick drink there. So we have our equip item base, which is where we're just going through and populating all the information and creating that instance. So we don't really need to do much here. Where we're going to be wanting to do that is right here. First things first, what we are going to want to do is actually be able to store this as a permanent reference, because we're going to want to be able to remove it, things like that. So character base header, actually I'm going to copy this. I'm actually trying to think how to do that. So this is something you'd want to determine within your project, how many equipped weapons or handheld items you think are going to be available in total at one time. So, for example, you have humans, we have 2 hands. Most cases, some obviously amputees, things like that. But typical case, you have 2 hands. Then, if that's the case, you're going to have a maximum of 2. If you have a game that you say have Goro from Mortal Kombat with 4 hands, I was trying to think of something that would remotely justify this. You would want to have 4, so on and so forth. So if you had like a weird 8-armed creature, you would have 8. So with that, what we're going to do here, because we do also need to make some modifications, because right now we're just equipping it. There's no what hand. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a copy for this, because we also need unequipped behavior. We head into our header file here. Did not mean to word it that way, but anyways, equipment skeleton. So we do have this section that we already have, which is where I'm going to be putting this. So I'm going to create a pointer, and this is going to be right hand item. And you're a class. So actually we're going to have multiple of these, so I'm going to put it up at the top. Forward declaration. So and then we also need the same thing for a left hand item. And like I said, this is where if you had a creature with 4 arms or 6 arms or whatever, you'd want to make some level of distinction here. But because, as I said, the goal of this is to be a realistic-esque, or as realistic as possible, survival simulator. Two hands is where we're stopping. So now we've got that. Here in our actual equip weapon logic, we're going to need to modify this as well, because we need to say which hand is it going into. So what we're going to do is right click, and this is just a trick I'm showing you guys. We could search through the header file for it. Right click on the function name, go to declaration. It's going to find it in your header file. Now, this is something you also need to remember with coding. We could go bool be left hand. Actually, no, be right hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use right hand dominance. As of right now, copy this over into the source file. This is going to throw a build error. It's not complaining right now, but as you can see when you mouse over it, excuse me, you see in the information pop-up, you see T subclass U weapon item base item equals null pointer bool be right equals error. The reason being this is a coding requirement in C++, is once you, in left to right order here, once you have declared a default value, all items to the right need to have a default value. So we've got two choices. We can either move bool be right to the left-hand side and declare it here, or we can keep it on the right side, give it a default value. And I'm actually going to change be right-handed, right hand, and I'm going to go true. So this will fix that error, and I just duplicated that line. So now when you mouse over it, you can see there's no error. It's not a problem. This will compile fine. So going back to our source, I'm going to fix the wording there. And here you can see when you mouse over it, if it's going to do it for me today, it doesn't have that information because literally it's pulling it from here, not from the header file. So what we've got here though is basically a Boolean indicator as to are we using, go up here, or are we referencing the left hand or the right hand. Now there is obviously two-handed weapons. You don't need to worry about those because they are, we have that information stored in there. And basically all we're going to do, and this could be if you want a left hand or right hand dominance in your characters, or the option of, you could add that in. I'm not going to that level because I don't want there to be a physical distinction as in, oh, if you pick a left-handed person, things work one way. If you pick a right-handed person, things work the other way. I do realize in real life that actually does play quite a factor in things, but still. Anyway, so now we've got that. Oh, excuse me. What we're going to do here is if be right-handed, and this is where one of those few other cases where I'm actually going to use an else. I personally don't like using them, but be right-handed, it's right hand item equals equipped item, left hand item equals equipped item. Well, this is all well and good. But the problem here is, what happens if you already have something equipped? We're going to have this item floating around attached to the character without being destroyed. So we need to do some additional evaluations before we do this. So if right hand item does not equal null pointer, right hand item, oh, it's a pointer, sorry, and destroy. And then we're going to do the same thing here. If left hand item does not equal null pointer, So this is where I mentioned previously in, I can't remember if it was the last episode or the episode before that, I did have some concerns with our weapon item base that we don't have a deconstructor function. I haven't gone through and done any testing on this yet, obviously, because we needed this functionality to be in place for that to work, to be able to go through and do that testing. So I do plan, and because that is very, very tedious, I'm going to do it off camera. Just do some like memory management and memory leak testing to see if this is going to cause a problem or not. I don't believe it will, looking into some of the Unreal Engine garbage collection, but just in case. Well, think about that though. On the other side of it, we've got right here, if the item equals a null pointer, we want to remove something. Well, it's this right here. So what we're going to want to do here is if B right hand item destroy, because all this is we are destroying the physical actor component that's attached to the character's hand, or will be attached to the character's hand. We're not actually destroying the inventory item. And then we're going to go right hand item equals null pointer. So just to explain, the reason why we're doing a destroy, then we're doing a null pointer, is because this is a pointer reference. And all a pointer reference is, I'm trying to think the best way to describe that. A pointer reference is basically, okay, this information is stored in memory slot 1. And that's all that is. So what this is saying is if there's something there, it's go to memory slot 1 to talk to it or access its functionality. Destroying it deletes memory spot 1, but the character still has the right hand item says, oh, all the information's over in memory spot 1. So you're going to get, if we didn't set it as a null pointer and something happened that we called the right hand item, you're going to get access violation errors because you're trying to access memory that's not either not in use or not what it's meant to be. So, all right. So, well, simple enough. We just have another else here. It's going to be left hand item destroy left hand item equals null pointer. And again, exact same reason. We're just empty out the memory location, tell the character to stop looking at that location. So it's pretty easy here for this one. If it's not valid, we're going to log the error. So let's do that now. Actually, logger get instance add message. Why is IntelliSense being weird today? Error level. This will be an error. Unable to spawn. Excuse me. So obviously we've got our logging in there, and as mentioned, log error and return. The reason being for this is you do not want to try and execute any additional information or any additional logic on something that didn't spawn. So it's not valid. We've got a bad equipped item. We need to bail. So yeah, then we got our equipped item, initialize item, whatever. And now right now, this doesn't account for two-handed weapons. This episode, we're not even going to take that into consideration. But we are going to try to keep that in mind. So now that we've got that, what we want to do is a right-hand item, set up attachment. Is it attachment? Attached to actor, sorry. That is going to be this. F attachment transform rules. And then this is going to, oh, it doesn't like that. I have to figure out what we need to do there. But this is where we're going to go and use our right hand socket in this case. So we're going to copy that define and just throw that there. It's a struct. Oh, okay, that's what. I'm just going to do this, and that's not going to work either, I don't think, because it's got other instantiation requirements. No default constructor exists. Okay, well, let's go through the easy way of figuring this out. So UE5, C++, F attach, and transform rules. And surprisingly, yes, as I've mentioned in other episodes, this is a very common process, going through and Googling so go to this, post 2. If you could give it a default value. Okay, and this is, like I said, this is something that you're going to find you go back and forth, back and forth. You do this quite a bit. Okay, so it doesn't have default values, but it does have a constructor. So no, yeah. Wow, I cannot type today. It's taking a look at these. So E attachment rule. Keep relative and weld simulated bodies. I believe we want this true. So, all right. So with that, we've gone through. What we've done is spawned it and attached it to the character. I'm going to repeat this exact same process here for our left-hand item. And we're going to use left-hand socket for this one, obviously. Now, what I'm going to do a very quick build here because we are coming up to 23 minutes right now. I'm going to do a quick build, hop into the editor, and we're going to see if this actually then attaches to our character's hand. Oh, actually, no. So what I want to do here, right-hand item, because we're going to be setting in as a right hand. Set relative location to F vector. No, how is this going to be coming in? That is item. Oh, where is that? That is the mesh offset. Did we add a function for that? Get mesh K. No, we didn't. So we're going to add that in quickly because I forgot to add that in. U function blueprint, if I could spell, function blueprint callable blueprint pure, because we're not going to be letting them change anything even in blueprints. F transform, get mesh offsets const, return, And what do we call that? Mesh offsets. All right, so now we've got that function that gives us that information. Save view, go back into here, item, get mesh. I don't know, default. Oh, monkeys. Because it's T subclass. Get default object, get mesh. I just dealt with this. Why is my brain not working? Because it's get mesh offsets. Yeah, because item coming in is a subclass of view at weapon item base. We've added that to weapon item base. Okay, well, that is ultimately what we're going to be looking at here. We're going to be wanting to... Why am I not remembering how to do this? Like, this is frustrating. Okay, so with that, I don't know why my brain does not want to work, but I'll show you a trick. So in this case, because we are using a T subclass of, I'm going to do a search for all. I'm going to do that in my current project because that's going to limit it to any code I've written. And this is, like, again, I'm going to be honest, like I say, I'm not sure why my brain is not functioning here, and I can't figure this one relatively simple thing out because I've done it multiple times. That's the one we're looking at there. Let's see. Yeah, that's that. Equip weapon. That's our initialize. Get default object. Or is it because we're using... No, it should just be get default object. Okay, because in here you can see, and this is just for everyone, and I'm sort of rubber duck debugging myself. So we have a weapon item base, item to use. We are pointing it to exactly what the same is. It might be... The only difference here is we're storing it as a local item. That's just so it's in the data store. Actually, could that be we're missing a header? I believe that is actually the issue here. That could very well be our problem, because it was treating it as a U object. Yep, that was 100% the issue, because I forgot to include. So this is, again, something you may run across, and I do this periodically myself, and I want to point this out. No, it's not. No, that wasn't the issue. Okay. Get mesh offset, but it's... Okay, well, let's see if we can work around this. So I'm going to go create this. It's going to be T item equals item. And let's see if that makes a difference. Okay, well, I'm going to leave this for right now because I want to move this episode along as we are hitting the 30-minute mark. And I want to make sure this attachment logic is at least working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch into the editor. I'm going to pause the video while all this builds, and I'll either be back with a build error or we'll be in the editor and make sure this is actually working out for us. Alright, so we are back in the editor here. I'm going to quickly hop into a play session. We're going to hit 4, and I left this breakpoint in place because I wanted to make sure this logic was coming through correctly. Now this is where that default value is coming into play. Right-handed is going to be true, so it's valid. We're initializing it, so be right-handed. We should go into here. If it is not a null pointer, which it is, we're going to destroy it, but it's not. So copy that over. We've created the attachment rules and we've attached to the socket. So we're going to hit continue. We're done in here. I'm going to eject. Now you can see we do have some other issues. It's connected to the player. If we hop back in, I'm going to move over here. That should, if we eject and bounce out, you can see it is still there. So there's obviously some other issues we need to deal with. With that, let's actually, let me select the bat. Equip character item base 0. Let's see. We have socket option in here? No. So it does look like we have some issues there with it connecting to the socket. It should be actually right where the cursor is where it should be attaching. So I'm going to stop that. Let's take a quick look at the code. It might be this E attachment rule. Oh, let's do it in the right hand. Snap the target. That could be my issue. So going to drop out of the editor quickly. I'm going to run another quick build. We're going to do one more check, and hopefully that resolves the problem. So I will be right back. Alright, so we're back in the editor. We're going to give this one more quick try, because I know we're already past the 30-minute mark here. So we're going to hit 4, hit F8. Yeah, and it's still, that might be the socket. No, that would be there. I think there may be some issues with regards to here or the various attaching. So with that though, folks, I'm going to end the episode here. We really didn't get much done this episode other than adding in some of the unequipped logic, the error handling, and we started the attach to character process. Obviously I've got something incorrect here, so need to work on that. I'm going to do a little bit of digging off camera to figure out what I need to do to address this socket issue, where it's getting attached to, that looks like the root bone, because that's right there. That is the center of the character. So Hey there, folks. So last episode we finished off with some issues where the weapon we were spawning wasn't actually being attached to the correct socket on the player, and I actually figured that out. If anyone who looked at my little comments, like that I throw into the videos, it's because I'm using the wrong attached to. So I went through, figured everything out, fixed up the issue with the get transform offset and stuff as well. But this is what we had at the end of last episode. We were using attached to actor, and that was the issue. We actually need to use attached to component. So in here you can see I fixed that up, got rid of the custom rule we were creating. We didn't need that. So it's the item attached to component, and then we want to use get mesh because that returns the skeletal mesh, and that's the component.
that we want to attach to. The reason why I didn't initially think of this one is if I go right, and IntelliSense isn't wanting to work yet. It was saying a scene component, and I didn't remember or realize, I should say, that skeletal mesh does eventually derive from a scene component. So I might not even be that. It could be an override thinking about it. But yeah, so you can see here now it's working. Use scene component, parent, transform rules, and the socket name. So that was the issue, is I was using attached to actor instead of attached to component. So we're going to fix that down here. Grab to there, copy that, attach to, and I did include the comma. Okay, so that fixes this one here. We don't need this transform rule. And then you'll see the other one is set actor relative transform, the item get mesh offset. Now what I did here, just because I ultimately decided I didn't want to have to expose the weapon item base information to the character. As you can see, I've got this commented out. I decided what I was going to do is actually put a helper function on the equipped item, because if we follow through the code quickly, you can see we've got this is our clear it out, our unequipped logic. Then we spawn it in, we check if it's valid, and we're passing in this information, and it's being stored in this equipped item. So I just decided, well, let's just make a function for that, which is literally it's just a pass-through helper function. But if we go to the definition, you can just see here it's item data, and this is where I was also screwing up. I was treating that as a pointer when it shouldn't have been. A T subclass isn't a pointer. So that was part of my problem last episode as well. But actually, I'm just going to undo that so it doesn't register as I made a change. So in there, we just need to add this in onto the left-hand item. So left-hand item, set actor relative, transform, left-hand item, get mesh offset. Now I did, however, notice there is one issue with this. This is mirrored. So there's a couple of different ways you can go about fixing this. You could go through and just do like a times -1. So something like that. Obviously this isn't going to work directly because we're using a transform. If you want to do that, you need to do that with your location information. So actually, I'll show you how to do that properly. I'm not going to do it just off the cuff. So what that would be left-hand item, set actor relative location, left-hand item, get mesh offset location times by -1, and that's going to invert everything. Now the problem with just inverting everything is it may not work right. Say for example you've got some fancy weapon with a curved handle that it's curved one way for, like in one part it's got a curve that would work for the right hand, and in a different place it's got a curve for the left hand. So just completely flipping the offset might not work. So what you could do there, and I've got to decide exactly how I want to do that, because if I'm using a left hand, right hand, I don't know if I want to use a transform for both. The other thing you could do there is, let's go back to, I believe that's weapon item base we have that in. F transform, yeah, mesh offset. You've got that there. So the other thing you could do, and this is what I'm going to do for now, F vector left hand location, left hand offset location. And then we're going to add in another U function for that down in the public area for getting that. So f vector get left hand offset. And I just realized my offset up here is spelt wrong. That might have also been part of my problem. Const return left hand offset location. So get mesh offsets, we're going to fix this up. And then we added that in here, get mesh offset. We're going to add another U function in here for that. Why am I typing that out? Because we already have that in there. So it's f vector get left hand location. No, left hand offset. I'll just call it that. And that's going to be another const as well. And there's going to be a build error in, well, an error in the get mesh offset because we just changed that, but we're going to fix that while we do this. Return, copy that, backspace once so we can get our IntelliSense, get left hand offset. All right, so what you can do there, now that we've got that, is get left hand offset. Now what this will do, it is a extra step in the code, but what it'll do is you have your location, rotation, and scale. Actually thinking rotation might need to be different for left hand. No, it shouldn't need to be different. So if you run into a situation where the item's rotation needs to be handled differently from left hand to right hand, you would want to use a second, go back here, you'd want to change this from being a vector to just being another F transform. So you would have right hand offsets, left hand offsets. And you could just make a single function, like you pass in a Boolean left hand or be right hand, whatever it would be. For now, I'm going to leave it like this because I believe everything I'm going to be doing, the left hand just needs a different set of location information. But now if we go back here, just quickly look through this, you can see we're passing in the item. We've got a Boolean for if it's left hand, right hand. We have our logging. We're initializing that item. And you see I've put a little note in here that is to change this function to be a Boolean return. The reason being for that is if we go into our initialize here, you can see right here, we actually have a use case that drops out of this before anything else is done. And if this, for some reason, it should never be hit. The way things are done, we're validating before we get there, but you want to add that just in case, because otherwise you can end up in some pretty weird situations. So because this doesn't actually return a bool, it's just a void, this could happen. And then we're going to go through and you could hit here. This'll, depending, this could potentially go through and set right hand as a null pointer, and then you're going to get exceptions on these two. So what I want to do, as I mentioned there, is change this to a Boolean. So we're going to go to declaration. We're going to change this to a bool. And then go here to this. We change this to a bool. And then we go return false. And right at the very bottom, we just go return true. And as I mentioned again, the whole reason for this is we have this one case where we're dropping out as a result of a failure. And this is on me. I should have mentioned this and caught this at the start. But again, this is something you'll find as you're writing code. You don't think of every possible situation as you're writing it. So sometimes you need to make some adjustments and change things on the fly as you go. So now that we've set that to a bool, we want to make a minor change here. And this is going to be if not initialized. We want an escape case here. So copy that. unable to initialize item, because this may not be an item weapon, so this could be an item. This is for things like I mentioned, the glass jar you could put in your hand, things like that. So now that we've got that done, everything here should be working. I say there is this one extra line of code. If you want to, as I mentioned, in your own code base, you could set this to get mesh offset, have a Boolean value to dictate whether it's the left or right, or an enum, or an integer if you have like 4 hands, things like that, as I mentioned in the other episode. So what I'm going to do though, I'm going to run a quick build on this. I will be back once we are in the editor, and we'll just go through and see how this is working. Alright, so we are back in the editor here. It's being a little unresponsive. I'm not quite sure what's going on. But let's give things a quick test here. First thing we're going to do, though, we're going to look at our player character and the weapon information, because I did set a few things up there. Player character I haven't done anything with. I just want to recap what I've done for the spawning logic. So in here, literally, you can see when 4 is pressed, equipped weapon. We're passing in a templated one for now, and we're saying it's for the right hand. So that's easy enough. Now if we go take a look at that weapon, and just browse to and open that up, you can see in here I've gone through and I did set some initial values for the default location. There's no rotation information. Scale is 1. We are just using location offset, which was -10, 5, and -15. So if we hop into the actual editor and we run play, okay, we're going to spawn in. So if we hit 4, we're going to hit this information here. I'm just going to continue through this because this should all work fine. And you can see down there when we look down, we have a bat in our hand. And if we hit F8 to eject quickly, you can look over, you can see it's roughly placed in the hand. Needs a little bit of fine tuning, but you do that once you get your animation set up, which is the next thing we're going to do. So we're going to stop here, and I'm just going to quickly copy over these down here. So it's -10, 5, -10, 5, and -15. And we're going to leave that as is. Let's do a quick compile here, go to this, and we're going to uncheck right hand. Compile and save. All right, and drop it out, we'll move that out of the way. We hit play, we F, well, I'm going to look up so we don't see it, hit F4. Now you're going to see here, I'm going to step through some of this. Excuse me. B right hand should be false, so we fall through down here. All right, all of that went through. Click play, and if we look down, well, there you go. Rotation information. So this is, I stand corrected in my own previous comment. The rotation information is wrong. So we need to adjust for that, which means we're going to want to make that left hand into a transform instead of a vector. But the other thing you can see is the normal spawn point is here. But with all that information and the variations we did, it's actually moved it up into the arm. So what we're going to do, we're going to stop. Everything is saved, but we're going to just do save all, file, save all, just to make sure. We're going to close out of the editor. All right, so with that, we're going to make those modifications I said you might want to do because, well, we want to do them. So equip item base, we're going to go down here. We can get rid of get left hand offset. And we're going to add in a const bool be left hand for get mesh offset. And actually, I'm going to even give that a default value of false. Don't need to add that in there. Go into our header. Wait for this to... No, it's not going to throw. Const bool be left hand. And we're going to go be left hand Okay, we're going to need to come back and fix this, and then go to our weapon item, get mesh offsets. We're going to do the same thing in here. We're going to go const bool b left hand equals false. Return b left hand question mark. Oh, missed the M. I'm going to change this from left hand offset location to left hand offset. And then all we do here is, if it is the left hand, we want it to return left hand offset. Otherwise, return mesh offset. We can get rid of this function here. We don't need it anymore. Go back in here. This should... oh, we don't even need... I don't know why I'm doing a complex equation there. We just do that. I shouldn't say complex equation, the selector there. All right, so now that we've got that, we do build, and same thing, build, hop into the editor, and we're going to look at adjusting that left-hand setup just so we have everything correct there. All right, so we did actually have a build error in there, and that is because I never fixed our code in the character. So all we have to do here is add in a true for the input on the get mesh offset. So with that, we'll do another build, and I should hopefully be back when we are in the editor this time. All right, so we are back in the editor here. So first things first, we're going to launch into the editor. We're going to hit 4 to spawn that hammer. F8 to jump out. We're going to see... Did it not spawn? Did I not hit 4? Yeah, there we go. I'll get rid of that breakpoint. We don't need it. So now we're going to hit F8 to jump out. And you can see the bat is inverted, as in it's upside down, going backwards, and it's in the wrong place. So first things first, we're going to rotate it. We'll fix these values once we go into the details stuff in the details panel. And you'll notice, like I said, with the animations, the hand isn't correctly holding the bat, so it's not a problem. That is something we'll be dealing with later on once I figure out animations a little better. So we want the bat to be about there. So let's clean these up. So we're going to go 8, minus 6, and 20 for the Z location. And looks like we need to move it a little further this way. So we're going to go minus 8. Nope, we want to go the other way. So minus 4. Too far. Minus 5. Minus 5.5. So that's what a lot of this is it's guessing, getting it just right. We'll clean these up. So 180, 0, and 180. No, 480. Actually, what do we do? 0. Yeah, we'll do 0 there as well. We're going to leave the scale. It's appropriate for this character. Now all we need to do is right click on the transform section at the top, copy all properties in this category. What that's doing is that's just like copy and pasting this information here. So the mobility, location, rotation, scale into your clipboard. Now that we've done that, we're going to stop playing editor. We're going to open up our weapon. Bring that over, and you can see mesh offset and left hand offset. We just paste. You're not wanting to do that now? Okay, so it wasn't doing what I wanted. Great, so I think this is 5.5, 20, and I think minus 8, and then this was 180 degrees. So compile and save. I'm going to move that off to one side. I'm going to play and spawn it in. 8 to drop out. Nope, these were way off. So with that information, we know, well, roughly, and this is where it gets problematic. because you're dealing with weird angles and floating point values and stuff. So we're about there. So 5. Okay, so it was 5 minus 5, 20. Okay, that was it. So we're going to drop out. So 5 minus 5.5, 20. Okay, compile and save. We'll just make sure that's good. And I'm not going to keep bouncing back and forth on this. I just want to get a rough placement for this. So there you go. You can see it's roughly in the right place now. Okay, so we've done that. Now, because we have modified the logic around a right hand equipped, you're also going to want to test that. So we're going to hop into our third person blueprint here. I'll open up my other monitor. So we'll bring that over, and here all we have to do for this is change that to right hand. Spawn that in, hit F8 to bounce out, and everything's still good there. Now, I didn't expect there to be any problems with this, simply because it's like we didn't change the code here. We just changed, let me pull up that code. It was this. Though we didn't make any changes to that functionality, we added in code to use different data. You still want to test it, simply because it could change. Something in there might be different. You might have, let's go to definition, just to bounce through. You may have accidentally put these in backwards or something like that. So you don't want to just instantly assume the code that worked before continues to work because you've done some code, like even though you've not changed the specific code, you've changed stuff in that area. So now this is where I'm actually going to end off this episode, because I do need to do some little digging, a little bit of digging and further investigation, but I'll run through a few things here. So one of the things that is currently trying to think how to describe this, confusing me, and I'm not quite sure how to do it, is idle animations. Right in here we do have animation sequences for like a primary action or secondary action, which ultimately I don't think need to be here. I think I got overzealous when I added these in, because we have everything is being done in a blueprint. And if we go back to, let me open it up, our weapon blueprint, where is it? Right here. Pull you over, open full blueprint editor. We have two overrideable, oh, we're still playing, won't let me do anything. Two override functions, our primary action and our secondary action, which is what we need to define how they're going to do that. And I don't think we need these specific. Oh, actually, we didn't test has melee collision. Let me just check something here. I'm going to run, spawn in. Okay, nothing broke there. Anyway, so drop out. I don't think we need to. Actually, no, it would probably be worth having those primary action, secondary action animations, because we can just use those as part of the blueprint. But idle animation, so that would be, let me actually get back into the editor here, spawn in, F8. So that would be the animation that would be like holding the bat or changing the player's idle animations, things like that. Because if they're holding a two-handed weapon, like let's say a pool cue in two hands, they're going to have a slightly different stance to the normal idle. So one of the things I need to figure out is how I want to do that. I know you could do it with bone blending and things like that. I don't know how to do that myself, so it is going to take me a bit of time to dig into some of the animation stuff. And for anyone wondering, when I do these off-camera learning exercises, for lack of a better term, I don't go into a huge amount of detail. I don't spend hours and hours and hours. What I do is I go through and get the basic gist of it, so that then I can do like the more trial and error learning on camera, so everyone else can see that as well. So, But like I said, this is actually where I'm going to end off this episode. It is pretty much the last episode for the physical equipment spawning. Next thing, as I mentioned, we're going to be working on the idle animations and the, or depending on how long the idle animation stuff takes me to figure out, it's going to be the primary and secondary actions. So with that, though, folks, as always, thanks for watching. If you do have any comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Or you can hop over onto the Discord and ask your questions there. I do try to respond to either YouTube comments, Discord questions as quickly as I can. But as always, folks, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.